A cold wind howled through the bustling city streets. The evening rush was in full swing. People hurried past restaurants. Neon signs flickered, and the smell of fresh food filled the air. Inside a cozy, well-lit restaurant, families laughed over steaming plates. Waiters bustled between tables, and the clinking of silverware created a warm, inviting atmosphere. But just outside, sitting on the cold pavement, was an old man wrapped in layers of torn, dirty clothes. His unkempt beard and hollow eyes told a story no one cared to hear. He shivered, rubbing his hands together, trying to gather warmth from the dim glow of a nearby streetlight. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. Summoning his last bit of courage, he stood up and walked into the restaurant. The warmth hit him instantly, making him realize just how frozen his limbs had become. The inviting aroma of food made his stomach twist in painful hunger. He approached the counter, voice shaking. "Excuse me, can I get some water, please?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The cashier, a young man in a neatly pressed uniform, looked at him in disgust. Before he could answer, the restaurant manager, a stern-looking man in his 50s, stepped forward. "You need to leave. Now," the manager said coldly. The homeless man's eyes widened. I just wanted some water," he pleaded. "I said get out." The manager's voice echoed across the restaurant. Customers turned to stare. Some whispered. Others ignored him, focusing on their meals. A security guard stepped forward, grabbing the old man's arm roughly. "You heard him. Out." The homeless man stumbled as he was shoved toward the door. He didn't resist. He had been thrown out of places before. He had learned long ago that begging for kindness rarely worked. He stepped back onto the freezing sidewalk, his empty stomach twisting in pain. He lowered himself back onto the cold pavement, hugging his knees, his breath fogging up in the night air. But just minutes later, the restaurant's glass doors swung open again, and a man stepped inside. His presence would change everything. The man who walked into the restaurant was tall, well-dressed, and carried an air of quiet authority. His tailored navy blue coat suggested wealth, and the way he carried himself turned a few heads. He had just stepped out of a sleek black car parked nearby, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tiled floor as he entered. His sharp eyes scanned the room, and almost immediately he sensed the tension still lingering in the air. A few diners stole glances at him before quickly returning to their meals. He made his way toward the counter. The manager, still standing near the register, straightened up. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to our restaurant. How can I help you?" The man ignored the greeting. Instead, he asked, "I saw what just happened a moment ago. The man who was thrown out, what did he do?" The manager hesitated, then forced a smile. "Oh, him? Just some homeless guy trying to cause trouble. We don't allow people like that in here." The man's expression darkened. "People like that?" The manager's smile faltered. "Well, we have a reputation to maintain. He didn't belong here." The man clenched his jaw but remained calm. "And what did he ask for?" The cashier, still looking slightly uncomfortable, spoke hesitantly. "Just some water." Silence settled over the restaurant. The rich man exhaled sharply, his gaze now heavy with disappointment. He glanced toward the glass doors, where the faint silhouette of the homeless man was still visible, huddled against the cold. Turning back to the manager, the man's voice was firm. "Bring me the most expensive meal you have, and pack another one to go." The manager's face lit up. "Of course, sir. Right away." Within minutes, the chef prepared a lavish meal. A perfectly seared steak, garlic mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and a side of warm, buttered bread. A second meal, identical to the first, was carefully placed in a takeout bag. The man paid in crisp bills, but before accepting his meal, he looked the manager straight in the eye. "This meal isn't for me." Without another word, he picked up the takeout bag and walked toward the door. The entire restaurant watched as he stepped outside and approached the homeless man. The homeless man barely noticed the approaching footsteps. His arms were wrapped tightly around himself, his breath coming out in weak, misty puffs. His body ached from days of hunger, and his fingers had started to go numb from the cold. Then a voice cut through the silence. "Sir." He flinched slightly, expecting another insult, another command to leave. But the voice wasn't harsh. It was calm, steady, and kind. Slowly, he lifted his head. The well-dressed man was standing in front of him, holding out a takeout bag. The homeless man blinked in confusion. "For me?" he asked hesitantly. The man nodded. "Yes, it's a warm meal. Take it." Shaking hands reached out, gripping the bag as if it might disappear. The warmth of the food seeped through the paper, sending a shiver through the homeless man. Not from cold, but from the overwhelming feeling of unexpected kindness. Why are you doing this?" he murmured. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he took off his coat and gently draped it over the homeless man's shoulders. The thick fabric was warm, a stark contrast to the biting night air. "Because no one should be treated the way you were," the man finally said. "And because I know what it's like." The homeless man frowned, his tired eyes searching the other's face. "What do you mean?" The man sighed and took a seat on the pavement beside him, ignoring the confused stares from passers-by. "A long time ago," he began, "I wasn't much different from you." The homeless man stiffened. "You? But you're rich." The man gave a small, sad smile. "Now, yes. But back then, I had nothing. No home, no money, and barely any hope." The homeless man listened intently as the stranger continued. "I lost everything when I was young. My parents died in an accident. I had no other family, no one to help me. I ended up on the streets, sleeping in bus stops, going days without food. People looked at me the way they looked at you in that restaurant, like I was nothing." The homeless man swallowed hard, his grip tightening around the bag of food. He knew that feeling all too well. "But one day," the man continued, "someone saw me. Not just as a beggar, not as a problem to be removed, but as a human being. An old cafe owner found me outside his shop and gave me a job. He didn't ask questions. He didn't judge me. He just gave me a chance." A lump formed in the homeless man's throat. "That one act of kindness changed everything," the rich man said. "I worked hard. I saved. I built a life for myself. But I never forgot what it felt like to be invisible, to be thrown away." The homeless man looked down at the food in his lap. His vision blurred slightly, but he quickly wiped his eyes. The rich man stood up and extended a hand. "Come with me." The homeless man hesitated. "Where?" "To get warm," the man said simply. "To get cleaned up, to rest. And if you're willing, to start over." The homeless man looked up at him, searching for any hint of pity, any sign that this was a joke. But all he saw was sincerity. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him. Hope. Slowly, cautiously, he reached out and took the man's hand. As they walked away together, the restaurant manager and staff watched from inside, their faces unreadable. The rich man turned his head slightly, locking eyes with the manager one last time. "You should remember this moment," he said, loud enough for those inside to hear. "Because kindness is what truly matters in this world. Not money, not status. And one day, you might find yourself on the other side of that door." The manager swallowed hard, looking away. The glass door swung shut behind them as the two men disappeared into the night, leaving behind more than just a lesson. Leaving behind a reminder that humanity is defined not by how we treat the wealthy, but by how we treat those who have nothing. The homeless man sat quietly in the passenger seat of a luxury car, the warmth of the heater wrapping around him like a long-lost embrace. His fingers clutched the takeout bag tightly, as if afraid it might be taken away. The rich man, now focused on driving, didn't rush him to speak. For the first time in years, the homeless man felt safe. But a part of him still doubted everything. "Why are you doing this?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The rich man glanced at him before returning his eyes to the road. "Because someone once did it for me," he said simply. The car pulled up to a gated house, modern, grand, but not overly extravagant. The homeless man hesitated as the gate slid open and the car rolled into the driveway. He was used to being pushed away from places like this, not invited in. As they stepped inside, the warmth of the house hit him immediately. It smelled clean, fresh, and inviting. A fireplace crackled in the living room. Everything felt unreal. "You can stay here tonight," the rich man said, leading him to a guest room. "There's a shower in there." I'll leave some clothes outside the door for you. The homeless man hesitated. He wanted to trust, but his mind screamed that this was too good to be true. I don't have anything to give you in return, he admitted. The rich man smiled. I'm not asking for anything. Just take this chance. For a long moment, the homeless man stood there. Then, slowly, he stepped inside the guest room. The water ran down his skin, washing away months of dirt and exhaustion. He watched in silence as the grime spiraled down the drain. He hardly recognized his own reflection in the mirror after stepping out. Clean, hair no longer matted, eyes less hollow. When he emerged, the rich man was waiting in the living room with 2 plates of warm food. I don't remember the last time I ate like this, the homeless man muttered as he took a bite. The rich man smiled. There was a time when I said the same thing. For the next hour, they talked. The homeless man, who introduced himself as Daniel, shared pieces of his past. He had once had a job, a small apartment, and dreams. But a series of misfortunes, an illness, job loss, and a string of bad luck had slowly stripped everything away. I didn't wake up one day and decide to be homeless, Daniel said, staring at his plate. I fought. I tried. But after a while, the world just stopped seeing me. The rich man nodded, his gaze heavy with understanding. I know that feeling. Daniel studied him. You said you were homeless too. How did you get out? The man leaned back. Like I told you, someone gave me a chance. The cafe owner who helped me. He didn't just give me food. He gave me work. A purpose. Daniel swallowed hard. A job. The rich man nodded. Yes. And I want to do the same for you. Daniel's eyes widened. You want me to work for you? If you're willing, the man said. I won't force you, but I can offer you a fresh start. Daniel's hands trembled slightly. It was everything he had once wished for, everything he had thought was impossible. But what if I fail? He whispered. The rich man's expression softened. Then you try again. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something shift inside him. A spark, a possibility. Maybe, just maybe, his life wasn't over yet. The next morning, Daniel woke up in a real bed for the first time in years. For a moment, he didn't move, half expecting it to be a dream. But the softness of the blankets, the warmth of the room, and the faint smell of coffee drifting from the hallway told him otherwise. He got up, dressed in the clothes the rich man had given him, and stepped out hesitantly. The rich man was already in the kitchen, placing 2 plates of breakfast on the table. Morning, he greeted with a small smile. Daniel nodded, still trying to process everything. Morning. As they ate, the rich man finally spoke about what was next. I own a chain of restaurants, he said. One of them has been short-staffed lately. I can get you started there. It won't be anything fancy at first, dishwashing, cleaning tables. But if you work hard, there's room to grow. Daniel listened carefully, gripping his fork. He had worked before, but the thought of returning to a structured life both excited and terrified him. Do you think I can do it? He asked quietly. The rich man looked at him, unwavering. I wouldn't offer if I didn't believe you could. A strange lump formed in Daniel's throat. He wasn't used to people believing in him. The first day at the restaurant was overwhelming. The noise, the rush of people, the pressure, it was a world apart from the streets. At first, Daniel struggled. His hands were slow, his body unused to long hours on his feet. He made mistakes, spilled water, broke a plate, got scolded by an impatient waiter. Frustration built inside him. His old instinct screamed at him to walk away, to disappear. But every time doubt crept in, he reminded himself of the rich man's words. So he pushed through. With time, he adjusted. His hands moved faster, his confidence grew, and soon he became part of the rhythm of the restaurant. One evening, as he wiped down a table, the manager approached him. You've been doing good work, Daniel, she said. Keep this up, and we'll move you to a better position soon. Daniel's chest swelled with something unfamiliar, pride. For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. A few weeks later, the rich man invited Daniel back to his house for dinner. As they ate, he studied him closely. You're different, he finally said. Stronger. Daniel exhaled, setting his fork down. I feel different. I think I'm getting my life back. The rich man smiled. You are. Daniel hesitated before speaking again. I never got to ask. The man who helped you, the cafe owner. What happened to him? The rich man's expression turned thoughtful. He passed away a few years ago. But before he did, he told me something I never forgot. Daniel leaned in. He said, "The best way to repay kindness is to pass it on." Daniel swallowed hard. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about those words. He had spent so long thinking his story was over. But maybe it was just beginning. Months passed, and Daniel's life continued to change. He had moved into a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was a space of his own. He worked hard at the restaurant, eventually moving from dishwashing to waiting tables. One evening, as he was finishing his shift, he noticed a man sitting alone in the corner. His clothes were ragged, his face tired. Daniel recognized that look all too well. The manager sighed. "He's been sitting there for hours. Looks like he's got nowhere to go." Daniel thought about how, not too long ago, he had been the one shivering outside restaurants, ignored, invisible. Without hesitation, he walked over and set a plate of food in front of the man. The man looked up, startled. I don't have any money." Daniel smiled. "It's on the house." The man's eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I know what it's like," he said softly. "Eat first. We'll talk after." As he stepped away, Daniel caught sight of his reflection in the restaurant's glass window. He hardly recognized the man staring back at him. Gone was the frail, broken figure from the streets. In his place stood someone stronger, someone with purpose. And at that moment, he understood this was what the rich man had meant. Kindness was a cycle. The cafe owner had helped a young boy who had once been homeless. That boy had grown into a rich man who, in turn, had helped Daniel. And now, it was Daniel's turn to carry that kindness forward. As he walked back to the counter, he saw the rich man standing by the door, watching him with a knowing smile. Daniel smiled back. His journey wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, he knew he was on the right path.